talking about what's going on. So Veterans for Peace is making the national news. I was talking to a friend on the telephone, and she said, I just heard on the radio that Veterans for Peace is asking is 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 asking for a panel to indict Biden, to indict Blinken. And I go, what?
Yeah.
And she repeated it, and I go, wow, what radio station? So it's been on the radio, and it's been on the radio in Nashville, of all places. So what's going on?
CBS Radio got a hold of me the day after we issued that, and I turned the interview over to Terry. That would be wonderful to see if they actually ran with it, because I went to the CBS Radio website the day after, and there wasn't nothing on there.
Wow.
Mike, you did send the guy the release, right? Press release?
Yeah. And he, he said he wanted to interview me, and I said, well, you want to interview Terry, and that's how, you became famous, I guess.
Yeah, right. Again.
So sorry to interrupt your introduction.
No, that's all right.
Send it through the censors in Jerusalem.
Well, that's probably it too. So, well, all right. So Terry, what got this going? Well, first of all, tell us what are we asking for? What's Veterans for Peace asking for, and then how to get started?
What VFP is asking for is the impanelment of a grand jury, an old-fashioned federal grand jury. Grand juries historically and legally are empowered to investigate kind of broadly, and ultimately, and thus also are empowered, of course, to narrow down their investigations to actually punch out criminal indictments, obviously criminal charges that are then prosecuted in federal courts. We're asking for that, respecting Tony Blinken, based initially on the ProPublica article of a couple of weeks ago that revealed that Blinken in April and May of 2024 had considerable information available to him from two in-house agencies, USAID and the Bureau of Population and something else within the State Department, both of which in considerable detail, with very detailed cover memos as well as incident reports, showed that there has been, almost since the beginning of the Israeli invasion of Gaza, constant messing with, obstructionism, out and out sabotage of humanitarian aid deliveries to Gaza, and actually then the dispersal of aid within the Gaza Strip. The fact is, apparently, that Secretary Blinken had copious information, as well as the explicit written advice from at least two of his underlings, saying that the obstructionism demonstrated by the Israeli Defense Force is such that it should require the termination of military and other aid to the nation of Israel. This, of course, would be a critical thing to do in the middle of a genocide, because of the fact that something on the order of 70% or more of Israel's armaments and munitions are U.S. imports, and all of their jet planes, and most of their jet plane replacement part. So the idea is, again, a theme of the Veterans for Peace is let's stop demanding some sort of abstruse adherence to principles of vetting of the aid and principles of trying to determine whether Israel is violating human rights laws and principles and treaties. Let's prosecute under U.S. law people who are U.S. lawbreakers in carrying out their duties. Blinken is a prime example. I would also like to add, just this morning, the drop site, which is the new Jeremy Scahill, Ryan Grimm investigatory news site, has a lengthy article that discusses how Blinken was intimately involved within 1 week after October 7th in negotiations face to face with Netanyahu and his underlings to establish exactly what prompts the IDF is allowed to act on to sabotage humanitarian aid shipments. Basically, this very loosey-goosey standard, which you have heard repeatedly when there have been atrocities committed, when human rights workers are assassinated by drones and other means by the IDF, that Blinken was negotiating over a protracted long night in October of 2023 what exactly is sort of the boundaries within which the IDF has to function. And the ultimate agreed decision was essentially if Israel, if the military believes that there is obstructionism by Hamas, because that was a big supposed preoccupation, that Hamas is actually taking charge of a lot of the aid and then distributing it or hoarding it for its own, for its troops. But the apparent agreement was, if you guys feel badly, or if you suspect that there is any kind of Hamas involvement, then blast away. A great example was the March 2024 World Food Kitchen assassinations, where 7 World Food Kitchen workers, and this is an organization that Israel and Blinken and Biden had publicly endorsed as being, like this is the kind of organization we want instead of UNRWA, delivering humanitarian aid. So with all appropriate clearances, 7 workers in 2 cars are preceding a short procession of trucks, delivery trucks, down the highway that parallels the Mediterranean shore. And they stopped. This was with all clearances, broad daylight, et cetera, all of the imprimaturs of all of the biggies in the 2 governments. And they stopped, and by prearrangement, which they had disclosed to the IDF, they pick up a guy who happens to have a gun, I guess, who is supposed to be their guide. They need a guide because there are so many streets destroyed, so much rubble blocking the paths. This guy knows whatever twisted maze there is to the warehouses where they were going to deliver the aid. And within moments, a drone proceeds to blast away at the 2 cars, kills 3 or 4 of them in one, kills several of them in one vehicle. The survivors jump out and get in the other car, and it proceeds, and the drone proceeds to blast them. So 7 people are dead. It's an absurd thing. And the official excuse of the IDF was, well, they picked up that armed dude, and that was Hamas, clearly. So there you go. There's an example of this ridiculous circumstance where Israel gets to determine who the combatants are. They get to determine on sheer guesswork with no evidence, with a cleared expedition they destroy it. It's a little bit difficult to say that it was accidental. So anyway, that's what we're doing. We're trying to direct attention to the fact that there is law breaking going on, crime in the suites, crime in the U.S. State Department on the order of humanitarian rights and war crimes and genocidal legal violations. And not incidentally, in May of 2024, Blinken, after reviewing the 2 reports with meticulous and copious documentation of Israel's sabotage of humanitarian aid deliveries, finds officially and reports to Congress that he sees nothing that rises to the level of terminating aid to Israel, military aid to Israel, and thus the genocide continues.
Good Lord. Now, I want to jump back before we go any further, because you talked about the drop site article, and Harvey mentioned that to me earlier, but I have not had a chance to take a look at that article at all yet, and I'm going to get Harvey to ask a question about it. But you're saying that the Jeremy Scahill is alleging that Biden was complicit a week after Israel's genocide started?
Yeah, it was very early on. It was Blinken who met with the
Yes.
Israeli cabinet, and they worked out, when it's okay for them to attack aid convoys. And, of course, if Hamas is always going to be the excuse, whatever they do, whether it's an aid convoy or a mosque or a school or a hospital, they're
And
always
yes,
Hamas was doing it.
remember also on January 26th of 2024, that's the day that the International Court of Justice issues its first opinion saying that it's plausible to believe that there may be genocide going on, and issued a few injunctive orders. The very same day, in fact, within an hour and a half or two after that was issued, Netanyahu has a big press conference and they blast the hell out of the UN Relief Works Agency, UNRWA, saying that they're all terrorists. We've got documentation of at least a dozen, and there's 12 or 13,000 of them, and we can't trust them. They are not a credible thing. And that put into effect a sort of domino cancellation of aid from many, many countries, starting, of course, with the United States, but 8 or 9 or 10 European countries that are donating to the UN for UNRWA assistance. It has crippled that agency's ability to reach people. And of course, it's
Blinken was complicit in that too, because he said, we have very high degree of certainty for these accusations. And then within the next 2 days, CIA said there was, the lowest index of suspicion.
And yes, and also, despite repeated demands by the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Israel has never provided any evidence for their allegations. None.
Okay.
And finally, the ICC said, well, then to hell with it. We're not going to investigate.
And so I understand now that we are the only country who has not restarted aid to UNRWA. I might be
the
wrong.
largest donor.
Yeah. So
Right.
good gracious. So I don't want to get off the topic of the letter, but is the article this morning from Dropsite News, is that going to generate any effort on Veterans for Peace to add to the request for the indictment?
With some internal discussions about it. What I think it does, and that we and hopefully lots of other people in the public will do, is take note of the fact that since the very earliest days of what has turned into quickly a genocidal expeditionary force, that since the very earliest time, the Secretary of State has been caught up in a very compromised circumstance as to how humanitarian aid is allowed and whether it's allowed and how much and all that. The joke within the Netanyahu administration was that Gaza is having an appointment with a dietitian. This is very, visceral, very dark, evil, this is famine. And of course, remember that there were all of these solemn, cruel declarations by Yoav Gallant on down to Smotrich and some of the others about we're not going to let, Netanyahu actually told Blinken, our attitude right now is we won't let an aspirin into Gaza. It's mentioned in the Jeremy Scahill thing. But I mean, all Blinken has done is enabled the darkest cruel fantasies, genocidal fantasies of the Israeli military and government.
And Samantha Powers tried to undermine that by saying that the USAID report and all that was months old. And well, I think the Rafah entrance has been sealed off now for how long? So
May
no one
1st,
can get in.
right about the first week of May.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's still closed.
And then one last thing, remember the other absurd thing, which was Biden's big deal about the pier, the floating pier, the $320 million, 3 weeks of active food delivery that kept being broken up by the effect of the Mediterranean Sea and the constant northwesterly winds. It turned out to be a joke. And of course, it has also since been revealed in the last month or so that the Corps of Engineers told Biden the conditions of the Eastern Mediterranean are not such that you're going to have a lot of problems with it, basically. And indeed, that's what happened until finally they junked the whole idea after Biden personally was selling this as the magical solution where, the IDF will be above reproach and will be able to get tons of aid from Cyprus onto the shore of the Gaza Strip and dispatch it more efficiently because of the location of the pier. So, I
we
mean,
can still provide unconditional aid to Israel,
right.
As we have this pier.
Yeah.
Which
So,
is just buy time.
So what you have are, we're talking about incompetence in the midst of an unfolding, unnecessary humanitarian disaster. And it's because it is fulfilling the intentional motives of the government of Israel and its military. But then you get the State Department bureaucrats, at least at the top echelons, playing. I won't say they're pretending, but they're certainly not treating an incredible humanitarian crisis as an incredible unfolding crisis. I just saw statistics today that they estimate that the average Gazan has lost 23 pounds or 24 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And, the children are of course, are being irretrievably destroyed as to their life prospects because of malnutrition.
Mike, jump in.
I wanted to add to what Terry was saying, a couple of comments that we included in our news release and in the letter that Terry wrote to the Department of Justice asking for this grand jury to indict Blinken. And these are not raving radicals by any means, but two senior State Department officials showed that Blinken lied when he issued his report to Congress. That report said, "We do not currently assess that the Israeli government is prohibiting or otherwise restricting the transport or delivery of U.S. humanitarian aid." And one of the people that commented was Samantha Power, director of USAID, who is hardly a left-winger. And she said that the looming famine in Gaza was the result of Israel's, quote, arbitrary denial, restriction, and impediments of U.S. humanitarian aid, and called it, quote, one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in the world. And Stacy Gilbert, a USAID bureau head who resigned because of Blinken's lies in his report, said that the report to Congress, she said there is abundant evidence showing Israel is responsible for blocking aid. To deny this is absurd and shameful. That report and its flagrant untruths will haunt us. And Josh Paul, State Department official who resigned last fall, about a week or 10 days into the Israeli genocide, he told me in an email, we were corresponding about this letter to the Department of Justice, and he said in an email that Blinken lied about starving people so he could keep killing them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what it comes down to. The thing is, and it's good to get, stay current with the information and do what we can to try to get the Department of Justice to do their job. But members of Veterans for Peace, who I would imagine are a good portion of your audience, really need to take a minute and ask themselves, how much more data do we need on what's going on in Gaza? How much worse does it have to get? And the biggest question I think VFP members ought to be asking ourselves is, what should I be doing? What is the best thing I can do to nonviolently oppose this? Yeah, I can stand on a street corner with a sign. That's great. I can write letters to the editor. I can do this. I can do that. But as has been said in our movement for a number of years, you know, when do you decide it's time to throw your whole self onto the gears of the machine? In
Yeah.
other words, do what you need to do instead of standing on the side of the street with a sign. Get in a driveway of a weapons plant or a recruiter or a congressional office and block the driveway. Do whatever you can do. Get arrested, like Jack Gilroy did at the BAE weapons plant in upstate New York on tax day this year. You know, got arrested trying to deliver the letter to the State Department that Terry wrote, and he took it to trial. And yeah, he was found guilty, and you know, you could brush that off. But there were a number of people all along the way, including cops and judges and prosecutors and reporters and the public who read those reports, who had to stop and think for a minute, what the hell am I doing? What am I buying with my tax dollars? And we're paying a genocide tax. We are paying a genocide tax. The week before our letter went to the Department of Justice, the U.S. gave Israel another $8.7 billion in weapons, in addition to $3.8 billion that we've given them every year for decades. And this is a genocide tax. It's a theft from millions of Americans who don't have health care, and yet every Israeli citizen enjoys universal health care. So this is the kind of tax that we are paying for bombs to a country that has health care for everybody, and we don't. We're paying for bombs a country can drop on people that is spending hundreds of millions of dollars building upscale homes in stolen land in the West Bank, land stolen from Palestinians, and we've got people still living in cardboard boxes and on the street. And we've got kids who can't go to college. And what does that mean for the future of our country and for those individuals who have a stunted careers and lives ahead of them? And we're sending this kind of money to Israel. So, you know, I want to take this opportunity that your show provides to tell our members and ask our members and beseech them to please quit being comfortable being comfortable. You know, it's time to get off your butts and do more. And our members do lots of stuff. I know you guys do where you're at, Jim, and where Harvey's at. And I worked with our members all around the country, and they're out there doing stuff. And I don't want to sell that short, but we can do more. And we know we can do more. And we have got to step up and get out there and nonviolently raise as much goddamn hell as we can, because we know what the Department of Justice is going to do with Terry's letter. You know,
Oh, yeah.
That's wonderful that he put all that time into documenting this, and we're going to run with it and make as much noise with it as we can. But when it all comes down, the genocide is going to continue. So what is it that we can each do that is going to be the best thing possible? Yeah, I got arrested in Fort Wayne a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to go to trial in December. Tried to get arrested with Terry out at the Air National Guard base in Toledo, and the sheriff or the county commissioners told the deputies not to arrest anybody. But, you know, and that's so after all said and done, you know, a couple of arrests for one person, nothing's going to change. It's going to continue. But the point is, what is the highest thing, the best effort that we can make as an individual? And that's what I'm hoping our VFP members listening to this will ask themselves and make that decision.
Great point. Great point.
And everyone can do something.
Yeah, everyone can do something, make their voices heard. And, you know, back to the letter, because the letter is extraordinary. It's 10 pages and it's so well written, so well researched. Terry, could you hit the specifics of what you said Biden is guilty of? And then
Blinken.
one of the things that hit me square in the face was when the letter talked about examples of the war, you know, examples of war crime violations from the past.
Well, first of all, it's the product of a lot of sleepless nights and obsession.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what's been driving me. The overall outline point to a number of very clearly documented instances by Human Rights Watch and other non-governmental organizations that point to the fact that there is very clear genocidal intent around the issue of delivery of humanitarian aid, um, and also mention that there are authoritative findings that are starting to pile up pretty deep of the overall genocidal intent of the Israel government in perpetrating the continued invasion and mass casualty events. The and yeah, there's a lot of footnoted stuff, and that's kind of where I made sure that there were clear URLs for people to find the actual articles or reports. There are very authoritative. The legal system always trails reality, and sometimes trails it by decades. But at least there are a lot of activist attorneys and scholars who are making the case as new data emerges every damn day of genocide and of mass murder and war crimes. So I guess, as I say, the theme is we need to talk in terms of, I'm not talking about lofty treaties. I'm not talking about faraway stuff. I'm talking about violations of our criminal codes and talking about violations by Americans of American laws that actually create a duty, and they are supposed to reflect a philosophy. The philosophy being genocide is the darkest evil mass act that humanity can perpetrate. War crimes, there are laws and that are supposed to restrict what is done in war, but you don't go wholesale after civilian targets in order to supposedly exert pressure on the adversary's government. And which incidentally doesn't work very much, does it? The thing is that what is being tested right now are the last vestiges of sort of the World War II era, with the revelations that shocked the world about genocide, about mass murder, about not hundreds but millions of people deliberately being put to death as an act of state, not just as a wartime accomplishment. And that's what's going on right now. I was impressed by his last social media post. Aaron Bushnell said, if you ever wondered about what you would do in the middle of a genocide, you're doing it now. And as Mike said, if you're sitting watching the news or ignoring the news, then that's what you're doing in the middle of a genocide that is going to be remembered for its destruction of international standards, for its revelation of the poor morality of the American adventure, which is the American venture and adventure. And I mean, these are historic moments that are going to be remembered in terrible and foul and dark terms, if we don't, of course, go on to World War III out of letting this tiny nation that is running amok actually trigger the nuclear weapons exchange.
Mike,
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I think your listeners are probably more familiar than the average person in the U.S. with what's happens in Gaza. But to go on to Lebanon for just a minute, after I read this morning in Sheer Post that 1.2 million Lebanese in the southern part of the country have been displaced. And that is, to put it mildly, overwhelming the Lebanese government's ability to handle people who are displaced and thrown out of their homes. But to give you an example of what that would mean here, it's one thing for us to watch the news and say, oh my goodness, look at all those people being displaced in Lebanon. On a comparable basis, if the percentage of our population was displaced or thrown out of their homes or bombed out of their neighborhoods, the same percentage of our population as is now occurring in Lebanon, here's what we would have. All of the people in your state, Jim, Tennessee, all of the people in Terry and my state, Ohio, all of the people in Texas, and all of the people in New York would be displaced. And somehow or another, they're supposed to be taken care of. The weather gets cold in Lebanon just like it gets cold over here. And so this is what we're paying for, and how long are people going to be content to keep letting that happen?
That's chilling. That's chilling. So in the letter, complicity can include aiding and abetting. The provision of weapons has been held to constitute complicity in AKAYESU. Well, can one of you take it from there and talk about the examples you gave? Because these examples, these examples are another smack in the face of all of us as we remember history.
The Akasu case is one that was before the Nuremberg court, if I'm remembering correctly, that there were several cases where, for instance, business people that had produced poison gas that was used in the camps were saying, man, we just had contracts with the German government. We didn't, we kind of knew what it was going to be used for, but it was a contract. It was just a deal. And the court, the Nuremberg panel, held that basically they found that you're lying. You, of course, knew what the hell was going on, but also that that's not an excuse. You knew that you were actively contributing to a massive criminal undertaking, and it is not a defense to claim that you were just a contractor, or another holding in a different case was where some of the top Third Reich commanders were saying, but we had our orders, and if we didn't fulfill our orders, we could be disciplined up to and including death. And the Nuremberg holding was, sorry, that ain't no excuse. You are making yourselves a party to commission of war crimes and genocide. So that is the situation. It is not an excuse for a Secretary of State to say, but I was ordered by Biden, or this is just policy. Which of course calls to mind that disgusting, ironic metaphor about if you kill one person, it's murder, but if you kill 10,000, it's apparently U.S. and Israeli foreign policy. So the situation is that there is really no legal escape from liability, and yet all of the perpetrators of what's going on are very protected, are very insulated. The United States refuses to sign onto the Criminal Court Treaty, and in fact has passed a law back in the early 2000s making it a prosecutable crime for anyone from the International Criminal Court to come to the United States even to investigate a suspected international crime. So I don't know if that answers your question, Jim, but I can tell you that the law, the fabric of the law is there, and it's being shredded by a runaway, completely out of control rogue. And maybe it's not a rogue nation. Maybe what Israel is doing is fulfilling the foreign policy fantasies for the Middle East of the United States and Western Europe.
And in that same paragraph, you mentioned Zyklon B. where
Yes.
the British military court convicted defendants of aiding and abetting who, via their businesses, supplied poison gas into Germany, knowing that it was to be used in extermination camps.
And so the latter day equivalent is Boeing, BAE Systems, any number of Martin Marietta, formerly known as. Yes, we're talking about people who know exactly what they're doing. They know what they're manufacturing. They know what they're shipping, and they're making a lot of money.
Mhm.
We mentioned Biden. When do we call for the indictment or the impeachment of Biden?
Well, we can call for it, Jim, and some people clearly are. I mean, there are petitions all over the place telling Blinken to resign, and we've written a letter to the Department of Justice to say that he should be prosecuted and so forth. But that would depend on our government actually being our government, and the problem is it's not. It's the government of the madmen arsonists who really run the show. These are the people that running the companies that Terry just mentioned. Raytheon, BAE Systems, on and on. These are the people who pay the politicians to run, who pay to keep them in office, who buy their votes with campaign contributions, who write the laws and lobby for these laws and advertise. And all of this stuff is done under the First Amendment because at some crazy point, the U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, corporate speech is protected by the First Amendment. So whatever corporations want to say, short of shouting fire in a crowded theater, they could say because it's free speech. And on with various Bill of Rights protections that were meant for human beings, and they've been bestowed on corporations, and they have become powerful enough to run this country, and that is what they're doing. And so we're hoping that in addition to the work that we're already doing, whatever it may be, that we can also start to understand that how this thing that we're being governed by is not our government. It is owned lock, stock, and barrel by corporations, in this case, weapons companies, but health insurance companies, oil companies, on and on and on. The highway lobby, just fill in the blank. And these are the people who are making the policies that make them money. And that's how this whole thing is being run. I mean, that's no new analysis. Smedley Butler said that, 100 years ago. But we have to realize that these madmen arsonists are running around the world setting these fires a whole hell of a lot faster than we can put them out with our bucket brigades. And so let's keep doing the work that we're doing and raising our voices and doing whatever it is that we can do, but at the same time, understand and start articulating the fact that this isn't our government. This is a government that's being run by madmen arsonists. And until we take away their powers, like First Amendment free speech and all the other protections the Supreme Court has given them, we're never going to be able to turn this around. And we are always going to be paying for a government that prioritizes death and destruction over life and even life of the planet. So those are some things I hope that we can start thinking about and talking about and acting on during this terrible time.
And I forgot to mention one of the arsonists, but Ambassador Jack Lew. Part of it in your letter, you quote Jack Lew when he's talking to staff as saying when they were bringing up these violations or is what Israel is doing, and he said no country has ever provided more humanitarian aid to their enemies. And what hit me there was the word enemies, because they're talking about women and children as enemies. So many enemies. And the children, of course, are the first to starve. So, who wants to talk about Jack Lew?
Well, first, you have to understand that the ages-old technique that the IDF has employed is that anyone associated in any remote way, for instance, with Hamas, is Hamas. And I mean, they actually verbalize that when they're sometimes talking about the genocidal aims. And incidentally, you're seeing the same pattern unfold in Lebanon. They're bombing. There are 4 hospitals that have either shut down or have drastically reduced operations because of bombing damage. They're being treated as the enemy because they're in Lebanon, and this whole practice, the IDF has distributed flyers and cell phone messages and texts and all kinds of stuff to people in southern Lebanon to a distance of about 35 miles north of the Israel-Lebanon border, threatening them that if they don't get out, they will be treated as combatants if they don't leave. So you're a civilian, and it is Israel that transforms your identity into the enemy. This is exactly what the various laws of war, the Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Principles, all of that was attempting to do, was basically acknowledge that if we're going to have war, there've got to be some limits. And Israel is kicking out the jam, and they're utterly destroying for a long time to come any restraint, any protections, and they're setting an example that's going to be cited against us endlessly. So Jack Lew is an unapologetic Zionist who I believe is a former higher state department official under both the W and Obama and Trump administrations. He is essentially there. If you Google his name, you'll see him come up in a great many of the transactions. You have to understand that the State Department, we're all, to the extent any of us are exposed to civics training in this country, the State Department is sort of, we're told this is like the genteel, diplomacy. This is where people talk and they resolve things amicably, or at least not with war. But actually, as weaponized by the United States, the State Department is an adjunct of the military. And that means also that another adjunct of the military, which is the CIA and the overall intel industry, is also riding along with the Pentagon. So what you have is an ambassador who is a very highly effective advocate for the Netanyahu administration instead of being a dispassionate listening post kind of representative reporting factually and letting sort of the truth go wherever it goes in terms of helping oversee and manage and develop our foreign policy in the Middle East. That's Jack.
Good grief. And you linked Defense Department and State Department and CIA, but it seems over the last week or so, the Defense Department has actually been the one with a little bit of restraint by getting Biden not to sign on to giving weapons, giving permission to Ukraine. So, but that's kind of off topic. Well, very off topic.
Yes,
So,
but you're right. You're right. But half the goddamn Navy is sitting in the Middle East right now on a mission to protect another country, another country's commission of genocide. And yeah, I've got mixed feelings about any perceived restraint that the War Department is enforcing, because I think that I think there's a lot of people that know that they get promotions during wartime circumstances, and I think that also people are in the military are really wanting badly for no good reason to go after Iran. Sorry, I mean to.
Harvey, do you got a question or two or three?
Well, I was just wondering, I thought the letter to the DOJ was excellent and covered a lot of bases, but I wondered if we can send any addenda on that, that would include the orders of the International Court of Justice that were issued on July 19th and the legal consequences, not just for Israel, but for other states, which which they are obliged, they are ordered not to do anything to in any way assist the continuation of Israel's illegal presence in the occupied territories. That's international law. I mean, this was not a suggestion. And
Right. But in 1996, the same court issued an order directing the nations of the world that they must immediately commence to disarm, stand down from any further nuclear weapons development and all of that. The problem is that who was it? Was it Hitler or who was it that said, "Where's the Pope's army?" I mean, the problem is that the UN does not have, other than persuasion.
Said something. Someone said about Stalin to Stalin how
Yeah,
the Pope was saying that he said, "How many divisions does he have?"
yes. So I'm happy that you have at least some sanity being exerted from the International Court of Justice, but and you're right. It was the July 19th holding is very instructive and actually requires dismantling the entire occupation and settlement development going back decades in Palestine. But who's going to do it?
It's settled law now.
Yeah.
So we're
I think it gets back to what Mike was saying about
legally a rogue state at this point.
Yeah, well, the United States has been a rogue state for a very long time. We just don't admit it because that's not what we're culturally accustomed to thinking of ourselves as. But I think it kind of gets back to what Mike was saying. You've got criminal law that says in a righteous world, Blinken ought to be spending the rest of he ought to be spending the rest of his time behind bars, grateful for the fact that he didn't get his ass fried. But instead, he's still the Secretary of State and helping engineer an incredible and monstrous period of American international history. So you've got laws, you've got all that kind of stuff, and it's for suckers. The only people who are going to be able to turn this around are us.
Exactly. And going back to what Aaron Bushnell said that you quoted earlier, Terry, if you ever wondered what you would do if you were living in a country that was committing genocide, when, sort of kind of referring to the good Germans back in the 30s and 40s. He said, if you ever wondered what you would do if you were living in a country that was committing genocide, you are. You are living in a country that's committing genocide. And so what are you going to do? And, it's not enough to just decry this. And there were, Lord knows, probably in the early days under Hitler, plenty of Germans that were decrying. Not too many of them did what the White Rose Society did and spoke out publicly and risked their lives. And, they did whatever they could possibly do to keep it from happening. So again, what are we going to do? And I just hope that question is something that we ask ourselves every day.
Yeah. My friend Greg Payton, who you may know, he's a Vietnam veteran, was involved in the Long Binh uprising. He was on No Sir, No Sir in that film. Every time I try to get him to come out and do something, he said, basically, the first thing you need to do is talk to and listen to the people who know you and who might trust you. You have a relationship with these people, and try to help them to, or just listen to what they think. I think a lot of people, if we know how to reach out to people in a way that promotes a conversation, that's how mass movements can come about. I think we need to do all the things we believe we need to do, but I think the more people we can help to reach who are sympathetic with that, and you know, that's the first step. I know one thing that I've loved is getting this Peace and Planet News and taking that to places like the barbershop and the gym and things like that, and just say, yeah, you know, here's something you might be interested in. You're not going to find this anywhere else, probably. So, and people, you know, haven't turned it down. So, you know, how much they read, how much it affected anything. I don't think there's anyone that we should be writing off right now, including a lot of Trump voters, by the way. You know, they are in many ways equally fed up with the power structure, and you know, they gave up on all that when they ended up back in 2016. I mean, he was the Molotov cocktail candidate in their minds. So
Yeah, you're right, Harvey. We can't write off anybody.
yeah,
Absolutely. You know, and the various things that you mentioned. You know, just taking for example, VFP's
yeah,
news, getting copies of that, keeping them in your car, distributing wherever you can. I take them to the VA when I go.
yeah, yeah.
You know, every place you can, you get those conversations started.
Right.
So, well, I know, Mike, you've got to go and you've got a commitment. Let's put it that way. So I want to just ask real quick, is there anything about the letter that you wanted to say that you and Terry wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say? And then throw in what's your perspective of what's going to happen over the next month with regard to Israel, United States, and Iran?
It's not a loaded question, is it?
It's loaded. It's locked and loaded.
I'd like to say first, VFP has sent 3 letters over the last 7 or 8 months. The first one was a lengthy, over-lawyered tome about improper vetting and failure by the State Department to enforce the Leahy laws and some of the other statutes, Foreign Assistance Act and whatnot,
Right.
that actually have some criminal punishments available if the State Department does not fulfill that very important function. The second one was a letter to the State Department pointing out that there is a thing called the Glenn Amendment that dates back to about 1990 or 89, where Senator Glenn, who I'm learning more and more in retrospect, was incredibly valuable because he was one of the last significant military congressional figures with integrity, as opposed to, say, Tom Cotton. In any event,
An astronaut.
the Glenn Amendment, he was horrified at discovering that 200 pounds of highly enriched uranium had been stolen from American inventories by the Israeli government in the 60s, which was some of the material that made up the beginnings of their nuclear weapons program. And the law is on the books, which has never been enforced against Israel, that if the president makes a determination that a nation is not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and that there is evidence of their having or attempting to have a nuclear weapons program, they are cut off automatically from any humanitarian or military aid, and the only thing that can restore it is an act of Congress. And that law has never been applied to the government of Israel. There is enormous evidence, including multiple, like 4 or 5 different CIA reports that have gradually come into the public domain over the years, proving for 55 or 60 years the ongoing attempts by the Israel to have the bomb and to have it actually. Moving on to the point is that we have tons of legal standards. They're all pretenses, like I was saying. They are all, law is for suckers. Adherence to the rule of law is not really what we do, but wink, wink. We're telling you that we do that. As for the next 30 days, it's going to be hellacious. You have this tiny country which owns so much of our politics, dragging the United States around. The Netanyahu government knows that there's no way in hell that the supine, prostrate Biden and Kamala Combine is going to do a thing, nothing, to stop the horrors that are unfolding daily. They are going to intensify. One of the things that I had forgotten is that about 13 or 14 months ago, maybe somewhat longer than that, Israel bought 10,000 2,000-pound, 1-ton bombs from the United States and 10,000 bunker busters. And they used 80 of them around Nasrallah's headquarters a week ago. And they used a whole bunch more in the last 48 hours to get his successor. Israel's going to absolutely destroy Lebanon. It is as inevitable as the United States president wants it to be. So I think you're going to see the worst is yet to come. We're all kind of waiting to see what Israel does by way of flinging some sort of hellfire on Iran. If incidentally Israel could blow up the underground Natanz nuclear facility on the outskirts of Tehran and cause an enormous radioactive cloud to blow across the region. They also, one of the things that Biden has been trying to dissuade them from, besides that, is going after the massive tank farms in many places in Iran, including around Tehran, because 21% of the world's oil comes through the Hormuz Straits and from, in effect, Iran and a couple of surrounding countries like Kuwait. So what you have is the prospect in Netanyahu's insane little pause, the prospect of inducing global recession or depression in a matter of days. If they blow the oil, oh my, and that will, of course, destroy Kamala's chances.
Good grief. Mike?
Yeah, very briefly, just to say that reminding all of us that this is not a spectator sport.
Right.
Get off the bench, get on the field, get involved. Thank you, and thanks very much to Harvey and Jim for the program that we're on. I appreciate all the work you guys do, and Terry for all of the sleepless nights that went into appealing to the Department of Justice to follow the law.